Okay, so we're back home now after collecting our cattail rhizomes. You can see the rhizomes here and the rootlets on the outside. And this is where the stalk was attached, like I talked about in the previous video. This is where a lot of the starch is, in that node where the stalk starts. So we're going to talk about different ways to get the starch out of this root. The easiest way, if you're out camping or something and just happen to find some cattail roots like that, you can throw the whole thing on hot coals, and this will steam everything, the insides, and that's kind of important to do because there could be some bacteria in the pond from where you collected the cattail, so you want to make sure to kill those off. Technically you could eat the starch raw, and if the root is actually not broken at all, you can open up the foamy outside, just like with the stalks, and then throw this foamy outside out after you expose the white starch inside, and then you can just chew on that, and you can probably see that it has a lot of fibers, and so pretty much you just want to suck out the starch from the fibers and then just spit back out the fibers. So that's a totally decent way to eat those. If you want to do it raw, I'd cut off the part that was exposed to the muck. You can see there's some dirt there, and so you could do that. If you want to be 100% sure that there's no bacteria or anything, like I said, you could roast them on hot coals for 5 minutes or so, and then peel out the foamy core, or the foamy outside, sorry, and just eat the core. So that's one way to do that. Then there's more sophisticated things that you can do. You can do cattail flour if you want, and I have a little flour here that's a little coarse, but I took that with me out in the woods. And there's two different methods to get cattail flour like that. There's either the wet method, and the wet method consists of first peeling off the foamy core. I should probably just do that now. And I keep on saying core, but it's the foamy outside. You want to eat the core. Okay, so all the foam has been peeled off, and this is the starchy core. And what you can do is that you can have a bowl of water or a bucket of water, depending on how much material you're dealing with, and then you're just gonna remove the starch, like really crush it and wash it off the fibers. So I could do that here, for example, just with my fingernails. So that's the starch that's in between the fibers, and then what's left is the fibers. And so you do that in a bowl of water, and then you let settle for at least a day, and all the starch, being heavy, is going to settle to the bottom. And then you just need to pour off the water and let the starch at the bottom just dry. So that's one way to do that. Another way to do that is just to do pretty much what I did now. Instead of doing the water technique, you just push off the starch with the back of a knife. You don't want to use the blade, because otherwise you're going to cut into the fibers. And so just gently scrape off the starch, so it's in your knife, and here you can see pretty well the fibers, the naked fibers, without the starch on it. So it's a nice and fairly quick method. You don't need a container of water to do that. The only problem is that it leaves, some fibers in it. So you're not gonna have, the most pure fine grained flour. But that's definitely an option. You know, the water method, or the wet method as it's called. You know, it can take a little more time, and you don't have fibers in it, but you also lose a lot of the starch because you know, when you pour off some of the water, some of the starch is going to get out as well. So that's something that we experimented with, you know, last year. Just get the starch out of that, and you can just dry that, and then it won't just dry as the flour. So that's another option. The last option is called the dry method, and pretty much, you know, you can just cut small pieces of the rhizome like that and just let them dry. And they dry, you know, in a couple of days, depending on where you live, of course. And then you end up, you know, with those starchy cores with still some fibers in it. And what I've used to make the flour over there is that I've used a sriracha, just kind of mortar and pestle, but with grooves on the bowl. And you can, you know, start maybe by pounding the root, either with 2 rocks or maybe even with a hammer, and kind of break up the pieces a little bit. And then once you're in there, you can grind it up. And it takes a lot of work. Takes a lot of time, but you can see that, you know, you have the end results. You have the flour, and then the fibers won't just be separated from the starch there. So that's another option. That's probably the most time-consuming thing, but that's the way to get the best, purest flour. So there you go. You have all your options there, from the easiest to the most sophisticated. Enjoy.
How do you use the flour?
Oh, well, the flour, it's you could bake with it. The thing is that it doesn't have any gluten in it, and so if you want to bake something, usually you'd want to add some wheat flour or some other gluten flours with it. You know, maybe mix it 50-50, and the cattail starch is really good, really nutritional, and so that's a good way to kind of add, you know, this wild bit to your flours. I've used it a lot as a thickener as well. Like if I make a stew and I just want to thicken it up a little bit, I add the cattail flour. I've also done it with desserts. Like I've made some berry dessert when I was out in the forest, and just smashed up some berries and added cattail flour to that, and they can make a nice gruel.